and I ended up on Gail Bradbrook's Heading for Extinction talk, and I can't explain how visceral the feeling that my kids were in danger hit me out of nowhere. And the next day I was in London. I have fibromyalgia, I had anxiety and depression. I hadn't left my house alone in a couple of years, but I felt so scared I had to go. So I did. I went to London Wednesday, and I went back on the Friday, and then I come home, and I didn't really want to be a rebel. So I went to a council meeting. It was about the climate crisis in Milton Keynes. It was their first one. I expected other people would be in charge and, dealing with it. Who am I? I don't need to be involved. But one of the councillors in that meeting said, we can't tell people the truth unless we make it happy, because people will just get depressed and do nothing. And I felt angry again. And I stood up and said, well, start coming to your meetings. And I left. And I left really upset with myself. Why can't you be quiet? Why are you getting upset when everybody else is sitting around behaving like grown-ups? But I joined XR, and I also went online and I watched Roger's and Gail's and Rupert's and all these talks. And I'm a bit of a geek, so I watched them in date order because I wanted to know who these people were and what their journey had been. And I got to one, Roger was talking, it was called The Campfire or something, and Roger was at the bit where he's talking about what happened in Germany in the 40s. And at home, I'm up and I'm out of my chair. I've got the used to the jazz hands a little bit, and I'm doing that. And he's looking at a sea of people who are not reacting at all. And I was really feeling for Roger. But then Roger said, and if you work with Roger, you'll get a lot of these. And then Roger said, the only people getting it are women in their 50s who've raised their kids and they're fed up and they've got nothing better to do. So I hit the pause. And I went on Facebook and I messaged Mr. Hallam. Mr. Hallam, I'm only in my 40s. And I'll have you know, I was very happy until you brought this news to me and you fucked up my life. But the truth was I wasn't happy. I think for most of my adult life, I knew that something was wrong, and I just felt that I didn't fit in. I was depressed. I was the mistake. I had to do better. And that's wrong. We've been told all these lies. I can now see that my education, it was a conditioning system. They were teaching me what not to think about. It's not options. We don't opt into stuff at 15, 16. You're opting out of all these topics like the economy and politics and all these things that we, people like me, are not meant to think about. And then people like this come along and say, actually, we need to. And I think we all need to now. And I love XR, but I struggled a little bit with just keeping it to the climate message because I didn't have a big enough understanding to know why we got there. So I had to very quickly learn about the economy and politics, and I can't tell you what a beautiful network of people XR has made. They are everywhere. And even though I might struggle with the machine bit at times, the people are fantastic and they're strong. We are strong. So Roger's got a new talk, more hope, more hell, but we are needed. Don't think for a second anybody but us has got this, because, what a year to find out that your government is against you. Brexit, the election, and now COVID. Roger Hallam, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming along. We've got Gail on the front row to make sure I don't go off message.
I'm off this man.
I had to say that to start off with. Well, thanks very much for coming along. I'm quite excited actually because I've done a few of these talks and they're all on Zoom. And on Zoom it's a bit like, what it's like when you're rambling away and you can't really see what people do they?
All the screens
are bored because they don't want to get rid of you. You don't really know, do you? So it's really quite exciting to be in front of some real human beings in no less a place than Stroud. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for coming along. I'm going to do a talk for about, half an hour, 40 minutes, depends on how carried away I get. And then we'll have a break, and then we'll have questions. And then the idea is we're setting up a burning pink group in Stroud, so you won't be surprised that it will lead to some sort of action. It's not an academic talk. I don't do academic talks, as you probably know. It's all about getting out there and getting on with the job. Okay, so I don't know if people are aware, but when Extinction Rebellion was started, there was a declaration of rebellion, and I don't know what's happened to it, but there was anyway. And there was a quote Simon, a friend of mine and Gail's, I think he wrote it. You can stop correcting me, can't you? Anyway, there was a declaration of rebellion, and there was a quote at the beginning of it. And I think someone took the quote off, but I thought it was great. So I'm going to read this quote out, because it's basically what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So it's a quote from John Locke, as some of you probably know. John Locke, very famous political philosopher from the English Civil War. And he said the following: to pursue truth for truth's sake is the principal part of perfection and the seed plot of all other values. So my understanding of what John Locke was saying was, if you don't tell the truth, then you're pretty much fucked, right? And this is like, for me, as a co-founder of XR, this is absolutely essential to what that movement is about, right? That was the founding principle. Forget all the aims and principles and all that. The founding principle is there's a truth out there, and if you deviate from that truth, if you become expedient, if you decide it's going to upset people, then you're on the path to hell. And if you tell the truth, that's the basis of everything else that's good in society. And we all know this from our personal lives, don't we? You know, everyone tells little lies. Let's accept it. I tell little lies. But we all know, and we all know people who tell really big lies. And if you tell a really big lie, then something really bad's going to be happening. And I think one of the reasons we're all in this room tonight is because we know that this society we're in is telling the biggest lie in the history of humanity, which is everything's still okay when it absolutely is not okay. So what I'm going to do tonight is to go through what Burning Pink is trying to say in terms of truth-telling. The centre of the Burning Pink project isn't to become successful. It's not to take over the government. It's not to bring down the government. It's not to do all these little bits and pieces. The primary principle of Burning Pink is that Lockean heritage, which is, unless you stay in the spirit of the truth, you're going to be lost, right? So I'm going to tell you lots of reasons and ways in which we're going to change society, but that's not the main point of what I'm trying to say tonight, right? What I'm trying to say is there's a paradox, which is if you deviate from the truth in order to try and win power, you will lose your power. You'll lose your soul, as they used to say. And if you stay in the truth, particularly at a time of catastrophic crisis that we're in today, the degree to which you stay within the truth, the more successful you'll be. That's my proposition, okay? And people have been saying this for the last 5,000 years, so it's nothing new, okay? But our society over the last generation or two, as I'm sure we're aware, has lost that fundamental point, right? That life is about living in truth and acting in truth, not becoming expedient and going, I'll lie because it's more convenient, it's more expedient, all the rest of it. All right, so I'm going to go through some fundamental truths that I think we need to acknowledge in order to live in truth in this society, this moment in time. Okay, so what Burning Pink is saying, which is a big move, I think, in a way, is that it's over, okay? This is the first fundamental thing we need to accept. It's over. The climate catastrophe is now locked in. That's just the way it is, right? It's the truth. It's certainly inconvenient. It's more than inconvenient, right? It's like disastrous. Who came up with that word? I don't know. It's disastrous. But the fact of the matter is, that's where we're at. And what we've had for 30 years, as many of us know, is 30 years of people treating us like idiots and lying to us. I'm old enough to know in the 1990s, the scientists were saying, if we go over 1 degree centigrade, it's game over for the climate, right? We can remember when in the environmental movement 20 years ago, the scientists were saying, if we go over 350 parts per million, that's it. right? And then strangely, what happens is we go over 350 parts per million, we go over 1 degree, and suddenly it changes. In 2009, at Copenhagen, you can probably remember this, you know, the scientific community, the diplomats, the politicians, they all said, it's fine. As long as we start reducing carbon emissions by 2015, it'll be fine. 2015. And then we had the Paris Agreement, and then we get to 2020, and suddenly the goalposts have moved again. But we somehow have the option now to reduce carbon emissions by the end of this year, right? So what's going on here? What's going on is people are lying to us, right? If we were going to prevent the climate catastrophe, give or take, we should have done it about 20 years ago, right? You know, as a co-founder of XR, I speak to top scientists all around the world. This is what they privately say. And one of these people talked to me last week, and this is an example of the betrayal and complicity of the ruling class in this country. I talked to the head of a think tank in another country, and he said, Roger, I talked to XXX, right? I swore to him, I won't say who it was, so I'm not going to tell you. But he's one of the top 10 establishment figures in this country, right? I'd say most people in this room know this guy, right? And they had a private conversation, and this person, this top establishment figure, said basically we've got 1 year to tell the British public what's happening in the Arctic, we've got 1 year to sort it out, and after that, that's it, we're done, right? Now this establishment figure has been at the top of British public life for 30 years, okay? 30 years. And in those decades, never once has he had the guts to tell the British public the situation's fucked. And this is the situation that we've come to realise is happening, right? You know, when I started Extinction Rebellion, I had that slightly naive, you know, liberal idea, you know, who was I? I was just like an organic farmer from Wales. I came down to London, I went to Greenpeace, you know, Guardian, blah, 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 all these people, with this idea that you tell these people, you know, they're heading for extinction routine, and they'll go, oh my God, let's do something. They haven't done anything, right? They haven't done anything. It's absolutely outrageous, because these people set themselves up to run this country, right? I mean, that's the deal. That's why they've got all these privileges and big houses and all the rest of it. They're supposed to be the guys who are leading the country. And I think people in this country are gradually realising, or rapidly realising, that we're led by psychopathic liars, right? These people cannot even conceive of telling people the truth. I'll tell you about Michael Mann. Here's another example. So, Michael Mann, does everyone know about this guy? He's a top liberal scientist, you know, on the news all the time. He wrote an article in The Guardian. He said, this was before the election, he said, if Trump wins the election, it's going to be game over for the climate. Notice that, if Trump wins the election, it's going to be game over for the climate, right? And his logic was, Trump isn't going to reduce carbon emissions, well, no surprises there, and after 4 years, we'll have to reduce carbon emissions by 15% a year, which is politically impossible. So what's implicit is, when Biden gets in, he's going to reduce carbon emissions by 7.5% a year, year on year, because that's what Paris demands, right? This is what we've been told for 30 years, is every time there's another chance for the liberal elite to actually do the right thing. So what's this guy going to say in 4 years' time when Biden's reduced carbon emissions by 1.5% in 4 years, right? Whatever bollocks is going to happen. What's he going to say? Well, he's going to make another lie up, isn't he? Because these people can't conceive of telling ordinary people in America or the UK the truth. And just to finish off, like Claire, a good friend of mine, She's had the same experience. I'm sure Gail's had the same experience, right? Haven't you? Say yes. You know, it's not like we're you know, conspiracy theorists or anything. This is what's going on, right? And Gail had the same experience. The top 10 scientist in the UK, private chat, he said, quote, "The situation is totally fucked." Right? You see what I mean? I mean, when's that going to get on the BBC News? You know, I mean, we've got 4 young people here. When is someone going to be truthful about your generation and say to you, you know, I've been a scientist for 30 years and the situation's totally fucked? No one says that. There's no one on the BBC saying that. I mean, I had a chat with Peter Carter, right? You might have seen the video. You know, this guy's been in the IPC process for 30 years. I have a long conversation with him. He does all that euphemistic science stuff, you know, we're going to have a big challenge on the population, you know, food supplies are going to be insecure. I said to him, so, Peter, what you're actually saying is billions of people are going to starve to death. And he said, yes. Right? And as some of you may know, I was on Hard Talk like a year ago, you know, I'd done the maths, it didn't take you very long. There's all these establishment figures privately saying it. I said 6 billion people are going to starve to death, you know, give or take, whatever. And I was on 3 minutes on, what's it called? What's that stats program called? More or less. I think I was on More or Less for 3 minutes. And they quoted some economist to say only 250,000 people are going to die at something like 4 degrees, right? And they said, well, Roger Hallam's making it up. That's where the establishment is at, right? It's totally schizophrenic. You know, 3 minutes on that, and then they're on to sort of, you know, the science of Kellogg's or something. You know how it works? I mean, Gail was on, what were you on? Bloody Woman's Hour. It's like, let's do the end of the world for 10 minutes, and then we're going on to, what was the next item?
Man makeup.
Man-made.
Men's makeup.
Men's makeup. So we're going to do the end of the world, and then we're going to do men's makeup, right? This is how fucked the situation is.
Yeah. Embalming.
Growing market, yeah.
On Women's Hour. Don't look at man anymore over Christmas.
All right, I'm not going to talk about the science all night, you'll be glad to know, but just 2 other things which have come out this year, which just like grind it in, as it were, is the scientific papers have come out this year that finally admitted or confirmed that whatever we do on carbon emissions, the Arctic is going to melt because it's already warm and it's melting. It's 3/4 gone. It's going to be totally melted in the summer around 2035, right? Give or take. Even if we go to 0 emissions now, okay? What we know is that the Greenland ice sheet is going to melt. It's done. It's going to melt. It's in scientific papers, come out this year again. Like, even if we reduce carbon emissions to 0, it's too hot, it's going to melt. 7 meters of sea level rise. Every single global coastal city is going to have to be evacuated, right? It's done already, right? That criminality is already locked in, right? You know, the West Antarctica, give or take, is more or less locked in, you know. We can have a few little debates about this. But this is what's happened since Extinction Rebellion started, right? When Extinction Rebellion started, most of the papers were saying maybe, and now they're going, it's happening, right? So this catastrophe is coming down the road. This catastrophe is already happening for millions and millions of people around the world. It's already happening to Welsh farmers, right? That's why I'm here today, right? But you don't hear from these people, right? Mm-hmm. If this was killing people in Herefordshire or in Berkshire, we'd be hearing about it, right? Mm-hmm. Right? So this is something that we have to deal with, and we have to tell the British public the truth. And the other truth-telling I want to come on to is this whole nonsense, right, about environmentalism. This whole idea we've had for 30 years that we're basically okay, and there's the environment out there, and it's a little bit tricky, and we're just going to pat it on the head every now and again, right, when it gets a bit tricky, right? This is a total nonsense. We're part of nature, nature is part of us. This isn't some weird hippie philosophy, right? It's hard science. What's COVID? Is COVID an environmental problem or is it a human problem? Is it a political problem or is it a health problem? It's everything, right? Because everything's all the same now. So what Burning Pink is saying in its truth-telling is, we're not talking about the climate, right? We're not talking about COVID. What we're talking about is catastrophic political corruption, right? That's the central theme here, which is the politicians that are in charge have completely screwed up and are continuing to screw up to the extent that we carry on doing nothing about it, right? So what Burning Pink is saying is there's a systematic issue here, right? There's not like kids going hungry, you know, in inner London. There's not polar bears dying. There's a whole systematic fuckery, right? And we need a systematic solution. That's where we're at this point in history. Okay, so there's this right sort of idea of system change, isn't there? I think these nice middle-class young activists, no disrespect, have been talking about system change for about 20 years, right? The old word for system change is revolution, right? Revolution. Now, Burning Pink's headline point is that at this stage in human history, the only thing that is even going to put us in the ballpark of reducing the crap that's coming down the line is a political revolution. Period. Right? That's what it's about. Now, before we set up Extinction Rebellion, this will slightly surprise you nowadays, there are a lot of people who said, don't say extinction. Put people off. It's a little bit, it's too in your face. Don't call it extinction. And then it said, rebellion. No. Don't do rebellion, right? Rebellion is just ridiculous, right? And then it turns out that it was a genius move. And we had a big discussion about it, didn't we? I mean, several people were on the verge of leaving because they hated the name, right? And I was going, whatever. I just want to get the name sorted. So even I didn't really get my head around it. But it was a genius move. And why was it? Because, in those first few months, went to people, I remember going to people and going, yeah, what are you doing, Roger? I'm doing this rebellion, Extinction Rebellion. And I was expecting people to go, what a joke. And people going, yeah, good idea. And I was going, oh, right, this is interesting. So, that's what we're doing with Burning Pink. And I went to, when Extinction Rebellion actually met in Stroud in January 2019, when I was proposing the strategy that led to the April Rebellion, we had a workshop, and I said, what Extinction Rebellion has to do is to acknowledge and make clear that the whole political system is going to have to go to sort this system out, right? And some nice liberals in XR decided that's too much, so they didn't go in. But Burning Pink is putting this at the front of the programme, right? It has a single proposition to the British public, which is to remove the political class from power and replace it with an institutionalisation of citizens' assemblies as part of the British Constitution. So don't get the idea that I'm coming to Stroud today to get all romantic, right? And, some punky, individualistic, utopian idea. I am proposing a systematic constitutional change in how Britain is run, right? It's perfectly doable because it's not utopian, right? It's not romantic. It's concrete, right? Lawyers are working on this. They're working on it in Belgium. They're working it in Scotland. It almost happened in Iceland in 2012. It's a big thing. And the reason it's a big thing is because academics and intellectuals all around the world, surprise, surprise, know it's over, right? They're clever enough and intelligent enough to work that out. And what we need to do is to work out what's coming next, right? Because if we don't work that out, we know what's coming next, right? Which is eat an elite version of fascism.
Yeah.
That's what's coming down the line. Make no doubt about that. Those people have ruled us for 1,000 years. They're not going to give up power. Even everyone knows that they brought around the destruction of the British nation. You know, that's what they do. So I'm going to give you like 3 reasons why we need this revolution, right? And they're concrete reasons. The first reason is because it's absolutely necessary, right? This is nothing about being radical, right? It's about looking at the political system and what we need to achieve over the next 5 to 10 years. And I talked to like an expert, a technocrat, right? A bureaucratic technocrat, guy who wears ties, goes around, advises corporations, right? And he said, Roger, what we need to do is to close down the oil industry in 6 months, right? That's what he said to me. Right? This guy is liberal, you know, he's got 2 kids, a big house, all the rest of it, right? That's what he's saying, because he's looked at the figures, right? These people are paid to look at the figures. And you'll find this over and over again, by the way, that the people inside the system are a hell of a lot more radical than the people who are supposed to be opposing it, right? You won't get Greenpeace or Friends of the Earth saying this. We'll talk about that later, right? It's people that every day they sit down and their job is to study the way the world is, right? They produce the reports and then the politicians mess around with them and the PR people mess around with them and it comes out as we've got a little bit of a problem, right? That's how it works. So the second reason why we need to have a revolution is because the people in power have engaged in the biggest act of criminality in British history, right? In world history. Never has there been an elite in world history that has knowingly engaged in an activity that is now going to lock in the potential death of billions of people. 1 billion is 1,000 million, right? 50 million people died in World War II. We're looking at 20 World War IIs. Think about that, right? This is what Boris Johnson and the head civil servants and the head diplomats have stood by and allowed to happen over the last 20 years. And we in this room and the next generation are going to have to spend their lives dealing with that shit. Now, if that's not criminality, God knows what is, right? So what Burning Pink is saying is, we're not making suggestions to policymakers. You know, we're not doing that quote at the end of the Science articles. You've read those quotes? It's always like, you know, the situation's really bad. We need to do something about it. And we recommend policymakers step up and do more stuff, right? It's always the same thing. What Burning Pink is saying is, the policymakers shouldn't be stepping up. They should be on trial. They should be in prison. Mm-hmm. They have destroyed my children's future. I'm mad as fucking hell about it, right? Mm-hmm. And so are millions of people. And tens of millions of people are going to be mad as hell when they're losing their pensions, when the NHS can't get funded properly, you know, because the world economy is collapsing, because billions of people can't eat properly. This is what's coming down the line, right? This isn't some abstraction. It's about money at the end of the day. So the second reason we need a revolution is so that we can have justice, so that these people can be put on trial and we can put people into power who are the ordinary people of the country. That's our proposition. And the third reason why we need a revolution is because it's a legal necessity. And this is a big change around, isn't it? When we started Extinction Rebellion, I think the general idea was there was the government, you know, they were the good guys and we committed crimes, right? And then we went to court and said, you know, we were guilty or whatever, right? That's all bollocks. In the British Constitution, there's the social contract, right? That's at the heart of the British Constitution. in the 1600s, this nation cut off the head of Charles I. Do you know why we did that? Because he was a traitor to the British state. Why was he a traitor? Because he had the opinion that God enabled him to rule the people of his country arbitrarily, outside the law, outside any social contract. And the reason we had a civil war in this country was to establish a very clear concept, right? Which is no one is above the law. No one has the right to destroy the lives and livelihoods of another for their own entertainment, for their own pleasure, for their own class interest. We don't do that in this country, right? We have the social contract. And for 300 years, the ruling class broadly stayed within it. They haven't gone around the country killing millions of people. But in the last 30 years, the ruling class of this country, the elites, whatever euphemism you want to call it, have engaged in a project which has now locked in the destruction of our young people's lives, right? Because it's locked in. And what that means is we're the moderates, right? We're the constitutionalists. We're the people in the British liberal tradition going back to the Civil War. And when we go to court, it's the judge who's on trial for complicity in this genocidal project, right? It's the government who are the traitors here. We are British patriots in that long tradition of republicanism, which says there's a contract. And as we all know, what that contract says is that the government protects the people and the people obey the laws. And as John Locke says, when the government stops protecting the people have the right and the duty to break those laws, right? So in a democracy, we've forgotten this. In a democracy, we have rights. We all know that, right? We've seen that with Black Lives Matter. We've seen that with feminism. We've seen that with gay rights. People have rights, and quite rightly so. But what we've forgotten, and what we need to start remembering, is that we have obligations. Yeah. There's no free lunch in a democracy. If you want to maintain a democracy, you have an obligation to break the law in so much as the government breaks the law itself. So this is a big change, right? We haven't thought about this for a few hundred years. But it's something that we need to communicate to our fellow citizens, right? So let's not, have that discussion, on Woman's Hour and with the Sun and with your local newspaper and with people down the pub. Oh, those XR people, the B people, or whatever it is, they're breaking the law. No. We're not breaking the law, right? They're breaking the law for sitting in and watching Netflix, right? For taking the easy option, because they're breaking their obligations. That's where we're at this point in history. So there's two other things I think that Burning Pink is trying to rediscover, I would say. Because where are we going with this? You know where we're going for this, right? Because we've been in XR for 2 years, right? This isn't going to end prettily. Let's put it like that.
Colour's good.
Right? Where we're going into is a period of massive stress. Massive stress, right? And every human culture that has gone into a time of annihilation, the time that we're now going into, it survived to the extent that it is located in a tradition. And for the last generation or two, we've had the absolute luxury of pretending we're not in a tradition, that we're just individuals, that we're just self-interested, logical, rational decision makers, right? What's good for me? I'm making a decision for myself. I'm thinking about what's good for my life, right? That's a complete aberration in human history. For 99% of human history, what people thought about was, what does it mean to be good in my tradition? What does it mean
in order for me to fulfill my obligations to my parents and to my grandparents and to those that came before me. In other words, we're in a stream of consciousness. We're in a stream of generations. We're just the latest iteration. And our fundamental obligation is to those people that came before us. And this isn't some abstract thing, right? You know, my grandparents' generation died in World War II for the liberty of this country. And that was no joke. There's some of us, you know, old enough here tonight to remember having conversations of people who lived through World War II. Now that was high stress, right? People didn't know whether we were going to be invaded by Hitler in 1940. They didn't know, they didn't have the hindsight, right? They were shitting themselves, right? And they got through it through knowing what was right and wrong, and through knowing they were part of a tradition. And when they were needed, they would step up. And the same thing applies to the people that come after us. We have an absolute obligation to the young people who live today. And the young people here tonight, you have an obligation to the people who are going to come after you, right? In other words, we're in this stream of generations. And that's how 99% of human race has thought about things, right? It's just this weird Western middle-class urban routine, right, that we've got sucked into. It's going, right? I mean, I predict it's going to be, in a decade, it's going to look like some perverse extremity, right? That's where we're going. So what we're in this room tonight to do is to decide to voluntarily reconnect with that. And the British tradition goes back to Magna Carta, as you know, right? You know, to that declaration that we will not submit to tyranny. That's what the English Civil War is about. That was what the Glorious Revolution of 1688 was about. That's what the Chartists were about. That's what the trade unionists were about. That's what the suffragettes were about, right? Yep. We have rights in this country, and we will never, ever submit to the proposition that some people have the right to destroy us, right? That's what I'm about. That's why I'm not a farmer anymore, right? Because the people that run this country, the global elites, destroyed the climate. They destroyed my business. And I'm on the warpath, right? You should know that, right? I'm done, right? That's why I'm down in London, not sitting on my farm, you know, enjoying all the nice greenery. I'm going to get those guys, right? And that's the spirit of our ancestors, right? That's how we won the Civil War, you know, by making absolutely clear there are lines, right? This is a penny on income tax. Okay, so that's the tradition. The other side, the other key thing that I want to try and communicate, and this is another major disaster. I mean, the lack of tradition is a major disaster, let's face it, right? You know, the complete lack of resilience in people. Another major disaster is for the last 30 years, and no disrespect to the professional middle classes of this country, but every movement, every charity, every political party, every part of the public space has been colonised by the professional urban middle class. And the professional urban middle class is psychotically incapable of showing emotion. Right? Have you noticed? You know, it's like as soon as someone gets upset, it's like, I know, right? Because I was brought up in that culture. Right? The only reason I'm getting upset is because I know how absolutely fucked the situation is. Right? Because I'm a farmer. Right? But one thing we need to understand here is we're going to get nowhere by being nice. Right? We're going to get nowhere by submitting to that class domination. Right? I mean, the lower middle class and the working classes of this country have been systematically removed from public life over the last generation, right? You know, I was a kid in the 1970s. You had a vibrant working class culture in this country. Where is it today? Yeah. right? It's gone. It's been demoralised. It's been told that it's politically incorrect. It's been told that you can't get things wrong, right? You mustn't say something that will upset people. And what that's done is destroyed the democratic culture in this country. Because what we need to understand is that democracy is not about rationality. It's about emotion. It's about popular expression, right? It's about talking the way people talk when they're looking at the telly, when they're down the pub. And what Burning Pink is proposing is that we re-enter the public space as ordinary people, right? You know, I've been told over and over again for the last 2 years, Roger, you mustn't say that. You mustn't swear. You mustn't upset people, right? You know? And I'm going, fuck it, right? I've played that game for 5 years. I came down to London and I was going, oh, there's all these experts, there's all these big professional professors and all the rest of it, right? It's all bollocks. They haven't got a clue. So one of the reasons I'm in Burning Pink is I'm over that, right? I'm going back to the way I lived for 20 years with agricultural labourers, right? You know, and if you mix with agricultural labourers, you know that half the words in a sentence are swear words, right? Because it's a hard life. It's hard, right? You know, these people I work with have fist fights on the strawberry fields of Herefordshire, right? You know, to get to the best patch. You know, that's what's behind all that supermarket stuff. Okay, so the next bit of the talk is the bit that I've been told I have to put in, right? Because Ben here decided this talk was going to be called Reasons to be Cheerful. Well, I should probably know I'm not famous for being cheerful, right? And my first talk, I forgot about it and I got told off. So I'm going to give you some reasons to be cheerful, which there are, as it happens. Because one of the strange things about Burning Pink, and you might not believe me, but there you are, it's your call. But one of the interesting things about Burning Pink is most of the people in Burning Pink are pretty cheerful, right? Well, that's a bit peculiar, isn't it? And I'm going to say really why I think that is. Okay, so one of the reasons to be cheerful, right? Believe it or not, one of the reasons to be cheerful is because we happen to be right, right? It's always helpful to be on the right side, right? The old phrase of this was, God's on our side. If you watch the Children's March on YouTube, if you haven't watched it, watch it, right? You know, there's a 16-year-old on there and they're being told off and they're going, yeah, but God's on our side, right? What that means in modern secular language is we're the right. We're in the right, right? Destroying the next generation is not cool. It's just not cool. And what that means is that you can have a wholeness, right? Because what's happening in this country as we move towards mass nervous breakdown is that people cannot integrate themselves, right? They're still living that lie. And what people in Burning Pink are saying is, we're right and we're going to act on being right. We're saying the truth and we're going to act in that truth. And that cheers you up because it's a massive relief. You see what I mean? You know? I mean, maybe a quarter of you in this room will help set up a Burning Pink group, right? And I'll predict a quarter of you won't, right? And I'll predict that a quarter of you that won't will be a lot more miserable over the next year than the quarter of you that join Burning Pink, right? So think about your self-interest here, right? This isn't about morality, you know? We need to be happy, don't we? Isn't that what we're told? Okay, so another reason to be cheerful is because we've got no choice, right? We've got no choice anymore. Being miserable comes from being in indecision, right? I mean, the situation is so utterly fucked, there's no hesitation, right? It's not like we're dealing with, you know, a polluted river down in Stroud where you can go, well, you know, I'm going to do something else and I might do the river thing, right? We're dealing with billions of deaths, right? We can't even begin to imagine what that looks like. But what we can begin to imagine is what it means to have no choice, right? And we are full of a tradition of people deciding that they didn't have any choice. The great radicals of British history were famous because they decided and realised they had no choice, right? You know, the researcher I used to work with researched working class guys from the Welsh valleys, right, that went to the Spanish Civil War and their motivation structure. And he said they didn't go there because they thought they were going to be successful, right? They went there because they felt they had no choice but to fight against fascism, right? There wasn't a hesitation. They were potentially going to their deaths, but it didn't matter because they knew who they were. They had that moral fibre, and they said, no, right? This is a no-choice situation. And what that means is that people become calmer, right? Because when you know you have no choice, you don't have that cognitive dissonance. You're not sitting there, you know, making tea going, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, right? You know, that Roger Hallam, maybe he's got good ideas, maybe he hasn't, you know, what should I do, blah, 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 right? It's going, right, I know what I'm doing. And that calms you down. I'm a lot more calmer since I've joined Burning Pink, because I know in Burning Pink, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm in a revolution against the British government. I don't have to sit there in XR meetings, like, pretend that I'm not, right? That's what I'm about. That's always what I've been about, right? For all the reasons we've said. And the last reason to be cheerful, of course, is because we're still alive, right? Which is nice. It's better than being dead, as far as I'm aware, right? And this is another fundamental thing that people in this society don't get, right? You know, we don't need to sweat all the small stuff because we know what we're doing. And it's good, right? It's good to get up in the morning. It's good to have a shit. You know, it's good to have breakfast. It's good to work on Zoom, even though it gives you a headache, right? It's better than being dead. For as long as we've got this gift, which we've been given, which is the gift of life. And this goes to the centre for me for what we're about, right? And it might sound obvious, but what we need to be saying to ourselves and to others is life is good, right? Life is good. Because deep down, a lot of people have decided it's not, right? They've decided maybe the human race should die. Maybe death is a good thing. And you think, well, no. But that's what evil is, in my view. And I'm supported there by the writers in the mid-20th century, in the Nazi period, right? They came to the same conclusion, which is in the human psyche, there is a desire to die, right? And that influences people. That's what creates fatalism, right? You know, lots of people who aren't in this room tonight are sitting there at home because they've given up, right? They've given up on life. Well, I haven't given up on life, right? That's why I am here today. And that's like what we need to re-establish. You know, when we go into Woman's Hour to do these interviews, the fundamental thing we need to be saying is, life is fucking good, and I will not allow it to die over my dead body, you know? And you get thrown out, won't be invited again. That's why they invite Gail, not me, because I've been bad at it. Okay, so last little bit, which is practicalities, right? So there's the speech, you can all go home and do nothing. No, right? What Burning Pink is doing is making these fundamental truths, right? Regardless of whether we're successful in the public sphere, which is why we're getting banned from everywhere. I had an article for the New York Times. I think it died. Anyway, there we are. That's the end of my career. What we're trying to do is focus on two practical lines of engagement, as you might say. Okay? Because, as you know, it's like, okay, once a revolution, that sounds great. And then, like, 2 months later, everyone's arguing and it's all depressed. Right? So we're setting up groups around the country with two specific aims in mind, right? And they're not necessarily the best things to do or whatever, but they're the best shot that we've got. And the first one is to make an ultimatum on January the 18th to the local councils, right? Because as we all know, the local councils have this nice postmodernist routine, otherwise known as lying, which is we've declared a climate emergency and nothing's happening, right? It's disgusting, it's outrageous, it's cowardly, and it's gutless, right? That's what it is. And that's what these local politicians do. They say all the nice words, and then they take the paper, they treat you like an idiot, they put it in a drawer, and they think they're going to get away with it. Well, with Burning Pink, they are not going to get away with it, right? Because on the 18th of January, we're going to nail to their doors a declaration, an ultimatum, saying if you do not enact climate emergency measures in your locality, within 4 weeks, we will engage in direct action. And it will involve something that's pink. Right? I told a judge recently I wasn't going to encourage people to do civil disobedience. So I'm just saying that as a sociologist. All right. So what's going to happen 4 weeks later? Things are going to happen. And there's going to be 10 demands. And all those 10 demands are going to be really obvious, no-brainer things. Like, community composting. It's really not that difficult, is it? But has it happened yet? No. Right? So there's 10 things. And then there's a little sting in the tail. The 11th demand is a permanent, legally binding Citizens Assembly for the Stroud area. The ordinary people of Stroud will decide how to decarbonise this area within 5 years to 0, period, right? Because that's what we need to do. And the 12th demand is the revolutionary demand, which is every council has a constitutional duty to write to central government, write to Westminster, Boris Johnson, and say, if you do not enact the emergency decarbonisation of the British economy, you are engaged in treason against the British state. You are the equivalent of Charles I. And we, the local authority, are legally obliged, under the British Constitution, to go into rebellion against you. Right? And we have our lawyers. Right? And if they don't, then the local council will cut off financial and administrative cooperation. And just in case you're interested, Glasgow City Council did this in 1919, right? So it wasn't that long ago, but it's coming back. And it's coming back all over the place, all around the world. People are beginning to sense that this is the only way, right? I mean, we've had politicians pretend and pretend and pretend. And we're realising this is what's necessary. Non-cooperation in the classical sense. And the next thing we're going to do is to create people's meetups, right? Community assemblies, people's assemblies. We're not calling them people's assemblies because it sounds a bit lefty, right? We're calling them community meetups. And what we're doing is a well-established format, which is to leaflet a large area. It's been done in America, put up posters and invite people to the People's Assembly. Some of you are familiar with this idea. People come and there isn't an agenda. The agenda is for people to create an agenda, right? Through people listening in small groups in respectful ways. And this has been done, as some of you know, in Stroud and in North Devon, various places in America, around the Western world, right? And what that does is it empowers ordinary people. Because what Burning Pink believes, and what we need to understand, is that the things that are coming down the line are going to require a massive social resilience, right? And social resilience is rooted in local democratic culture, right? We're just going to be wiped out by the ruling class unless we're supported in the grassroots, right? By people going, I need to know how to hold a meeting, I know how to facilitate, I know how to go out leafleting, I know how to go door knocking, right? I know how to cause a fuss when we need to cause a fuss. And we need to do that. And there's a long revolutionary tradition of this, right? It's called going to the people. And it's tough. And it's it's a long, long slog, but there's no substitute for it, unless we want to be this little sliver of ex-RBP activists that can be destroyed because we haven't put roots in the community, right? And what this does is it brings ordinary people into politics, which has to be a great idea, because most people in politics are really weird, right? Aren't they? They're so weird, right? I mean, God knows. So what the idea is, as you may know, is that these community groups, then they create community campaigns, and then we train and facilitate local civil disobedience, people going to the councils and blockading them, and council tax strikes and hunger strikes, all this repertoire. We're all going to discover it. We're not exactly sure how it's going to work, but that's the direction of travel. And then the critical moment is that these people will put up candidates, right, against the political parties. And this is a critical move, right? Because if you ever dealt with politicians, you know they don't give a fuck unless you start standing against them, because that undermines their power, right? And only when we start standing against them will they start to change. And surprisingly enough, when ordinary people stand against politicians all across the Western world, you know what happens, right? The ordinary people win. You've seen with that, has people seen that thing, Knock Down the House?
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen that, anyone? Everyone's got to watch Knock Down the House. That's like the American version of BP, right? Working class people around America standing against the democratic establishment, right? And they're starting to win. Why? Because people are fucked off with the establishment, and they see ordinary people and they go, they're like me, I'll vote for them, right? I mean, in North Devon, they put up 9 candidates. I talked to the guy who organised it, and I said, why did they win? Like 8 of them won. He said, it's not because of what they said, it's because of who they are, right? They're just ordinary people. So these are the 2 main thrusts, right, that we're looking at. And by moving these 2 things together, that's how we prepare for whatever's going to come down the line. Okay, so I'm going to finish off because I've talked too much. I just want to finish off by saying that all right, I'm going to finish off by just making this slightly full-on point, but I'll say it anyway because that's what I do. Which is, in my view, right, there's a certain slither of people who've made this decision, right? It's what I call going to the other side. We know what our life is now, right? And then there's a big swathe of people that are never going to do that, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the people in between. And those are the people who happen to be in this room tonight, right? In other words, you're the most important people in the world at this moment in history. It's not people like me, because there's not many of us, right? You see what I'm trying to say? It's like the next group. When the next group mobilise, you get to the critical mass, right? I mean, my idea with Extinction Rebellion when it started was it was going to be 3,000 people, and 1,000 of them would be in prison by now, right? That was my plan. In other words, like, we need to find those 5,000 people who are prepared to go into rebellion, who are prepared to make that commitment in their lives, right? They're going to talk to their partners, they're going to think about giving up their jobs, they're going to be prepared to lose their houses. Those people are going to go into classical resistance in the next 5 years. And if we're going to be successful to the extent we are, it's going to be you guys, right? And the guys who come to the next few meetings. Because the vast swathe of people, right through human history, don't do anything, right? We know this. This is the 3.5% thing. But it's not actually 3.5%, right? You know, as a social scientist, I tell you, the 3.5% turn up for the last fortnight with a bit of glory, right? The people that make revolutions are 10,000. It's the 10,000 people. And we're the 10,000 people. And it's a really heavy deal, right? Because lives of millions of people depend upon us. And that's what we need to think about. You know, I wish it wasn't the way. It is, but it is. You know, I'm a social scientist. That's what I spent 5 years studying, right? I could be wrong, but, you know, maybe I'm not. So I want to finish with that thought in mind, right? But also I want to finish with a modern quote, right? So you had John Locke at the beginning, that weird 17th century language. So now I'm going to give you Larry Kramer. Larry Kramer's my hero. Right? He was an activist in New York when the gay community was getting decimated by AIDS. They had all these nice pleasant meetings, you know, the sort where, you know, they discussed, you know, giving medicine to gay people. It's all bollocks, nothing was happening. He came along and guess what? He got emotional, right? And the emotion led to a massive success. And his motto was as follows, so I'll leave you with this, okay? He said, we didn't give a flying fuck what people thought of us, and that was our strength. Think about that one.